My name is Nathaniel Crow, and I have served as a park ranger in the Appalachian Mountains for over 15 years. I have worn the uniform through summers when the air itself seemed heavy with insects, through autumns when the ridges glowed red and gold like they had caught fire, through winters that buried the cabins and outposts until only the chimney stacks rose above the drifts. My job is to guide, to protect, and to enforce the rules, not just the federal regulations that govern a national park, but the deeper rules, the ones not written down, the ones that keep hikers alive. Outsiders often think the Appalachians are gentle mountains, old and worn down compared to the sharp peaks out west. That is true geologically. But age does not mean harmless. These mountains are ancient in a way that unsettles the mind if you think too hard about it. Their forests were already towering and endless before this country had a name. And in that time, they have collected more than deer and black bears. They have gathered silence that moves like a predator, shadows that do not match their owners, voices that repeat when no echo should return. I learned the rules slowly through mistakes that left scars. I carry them like scripture now. When people arrive, families with bright new tents, college kids with cheap packs, retirees with shiny walking sticks, they laugh when I tell them the guidelines. I do not laugh, because every year we lose people. And if I were honest, I would tell you not all of them are lost. Some are taken. I was still green when I realized the official pamphlets were not enough. They warned of hypothermia, of dehydration of bears. Useful advice, yes, but none of it explained why hikers vanished from a clear trail at noon. None of it explained why entire search parties came back rattled, reporting the same wrong thing, that the woods were moving around them. The first time I saw it myself, I was 24, assigned to a stretch of trail near Blood Mountain. A hiker had not returned to the shelter. His friends were frantic. We went out with radios and headlamps. Around midnight, as I swept my light over the rhododendron thickets, I saw footprints crossing the trail ahead. Bare footprints, though the air was below freezing. I called out. The prints walked into the brush, so I followed. The snow was shallow and the prints sank in only a half inch. That is impossible for a grown man. Then I noticed something worse. The prints were not melting the snow. They were just depressions, no moisture, as though a shape had pressed down without weight or heat. I turned back immediately. I never found that hiker. We never found his body. That was the night I started listening to the old rangers. They never wrote the rules down, but they whispered them like prayers before heading out on patrol. Each one tied to a story, each story tied to someone who did not come back. Over the years, I collected them, memorized them, and lived by them. Some are simple. Some will sound like nonsense. All of them matter. Rule 1: if you hear your name called after dark, do not answer. This is the most repeated, the most tested, the most fatal. The thing that wears your name knows you. It is patient. It waits until you are tired, until your mind drifts toward sleep. I have heard it myself, Nathaniel. Always the same intonation, always from just beyond the tree line. Too far to see, too close to ignore. Once, a rookie I was partnered with broke the rule. He heard a voice call, "Ben," and he walked into the dark. He came back 15 minutes later, pale and sweating, insisting he had only stepped away to piss. But his boots were clean, his radio battery dead, and when I looked into his eyes, they seemed borrowed. He quit within the month. I still wonder if the thing that returned was truly him. Never follow a trail marker that looks too new. The Park Service does replace signs, of course, but they weather fast in this climate. Moss creeps in, paint fades, wood cracks. If you find a marker gleaming fresh, wood unscarred, letters sharp like they were carved yesterday, keep walking the direction you were going. Because if you follow, you will walk in circles that bend tighter and tighter until you find yourself back at the same sign again, except this time your tracks will have vanished. Hikers who disobey are found days later, starved and delirious, swearing they never stopped moving. A few are never found at all. Rule 3: when the wind dies, be still. This one feels ridiculous until you experience it. The Appalachians breathe. There is always some stir of leaves, some sighing through the ridges. But sometimes, unnaturally abruptly, the air goes silent. Birds stop, insects stop. Even the sound of your own footsteps feels loud. That is when you must stop where you are and wait. I have seen what happens if you don't. A volunteer once kept walking during the stillness, muttering that he had a job to finish. The forest around him seemed to tilt, trees leaning though their trunks did not move, ground pulling like a tide. He stumbled forward, and when the wind returned, he was gone. We never found a trace. I have obeyed this rule every time since. It has saved me twice. Rule 4: if you see cairns, stone stacks, do not touch them, do not walk between them. Do not photograph them. These are not built by hikers. They appear overnight in places no human would bother. I have found them in the center of frozen ponds, on sheer cliffs, deep in hollows where no trail runs. Once, during a search, a woman from the team stepped between two cairns. She screamed. Not like she was hurt, more like she was shocked by what she saw. Then she vanished. We combed that hollow for 3 days. On the 4th morning, another cairn appeared at the trailhead. Her scarf lay folded on top. Rule 5: do not linger at reflections. The mountains are filled with streams, ponds and rain-filled rock pools. They tempt you to lean close. That is when the water starts showing more than it should. Sometimes it shows your face smiling when you are not. Sometimes it shows a figure standing behind you when you are alone. And sometimes, if you stare too long, it does not show you at all. I look only quick enough to drink, nothing more. There are more rules, too many for one breath, but those 5 are the pillars. I teach them to every rookie, every intern, every seasonal ranger who works a summer and then flees back to college with new shadows in their eyes. I tell them to hikers too, though most laugh. They think it is folklore, mountain superstition. Some survive anyway by chance, others not. I cannot protect them all. All I can do is repeat the words like a prayer. The strangest part is how the mountains seem to test you once they know you know the rules. They give you choices. I was patrolling near Klingman's Dome last fall when I heard my name at dusk. I ignored it, of course, but moments later, a hiker came running up the trail, lost pale, insisting he had been following my voice. He claimed I had called him to safety. His story was impossible, but he was alive. I did not correct him. The mountains play both sides. They trick, they save, they never reveal why. I carry a small notebook in my uniform pocket. Inside are the names of every person we never found. I read them sometimes at night, when the station is quiet, when the wind hisses through the radio antenna. It keeps me humble. It reminds me that even with the rules, survival is not guaranteed. It is only bargained for, and the mountains always collect their due eventually. I know my name will be in someone else's notebook one day. I only hope the rules hold long enough. That is how I begin this story, with rules, with warnings, with the knowledge that my life has been shaped by things I cannot fully explain. You may not believe me now. That is fine. But by the end you will. Because these mountains do not care about belief. They only care about attention, and once they have it, they never let go. The rules had been my guardrails for years, but the longer I worked these ridges, the more I realized they were not enough by themselves. Rules are only useful if people follow them, and most hikers never truly believe until it is too late. That was the lesson carved into me the summer we lost 3 in a single week. The first was a college student from North Carolina. He and his friends had set out for an overnight on the Appalachian Trail, planning to camp at one of the shelters before pushing deeper into the Smokies. They checked in at the ranger station like responsible visitors, cheerful, shoulders jangling with cheap aluminum cookware. He joked with me about bear spray, asking if it really worked. I smiled, handed them a map, and gave the usual speech: stay on trail, pack out trash, hang food at night. But before they left, I added the real rules. I told them plainly, as I always do, if you hear your name called after dark, don't answer. If you see cairns, don't touch them. And if the woods go still, stop moving until the wind returns. They laughed. Everyone laughs. It is easier than admitting the mountains might be older than laughter. 2 days later, only 2 of them stumbled back to the trailhead. The missing one, a boy named Connor, had vanished while gathering water at dusk. His friends said they heard him call out from the trees, first confused, then certain. then farther and farther away. They chased the sound until they realized they had left their packs behind. When they returned, the packs were still there, but Connor was not. His footprints ended by a shallow creek, toes pointed toward the water. That was all. We searched for 3 days, grid by grid. On the 4th morning, I woke in the ranger cabin to the sound of my own name being whispered through the wall. I did not move. I lay still, listening until dawn bled the sky pale and the whisper faded. Connor's body was never found. His parents still send letters every year. I keep them in a drawer I cannot bear to open. The second case came only days later, this time a middle-aged hiker who had set out solo. He signed the registry at the trailhead, cheerful handwriting looping across the page. He never signed out. We found his tent 3 miles up, pitched neatly beside the trail. Inside were his sleeping bag, his food, even his boots. The man himself was gone. I noticed something else, something I did not report on the official paperwork. The tent flap was zipped from the inside. The tracks around the tent were shallow, scattered, almost hesitant, but every single one pointed toward the woods. None came back. The man was not barefoot, yet the prints ended abruptly in the moss after only a dozen paces, as though he had stepped into something and vanished mid-stride. I walked that circle 3 times before I felt the air still around me. The silence pressed hard, ringing in my ears. I froze until the wind returned. When it did, the prints were gone. I know how that sounds. It is the truth anyway. The third loss that week was the one that nearly broke me. A young woman named Allison, hiking with her brother. They were experienced. Light packs, good boots, careful with their trail times. They stopped at a shelter on a rainy night, sharing the space with another pair of hikers. In the morning, her brother woke to find Allison gone. Her pack was still beside his, her boots too. The others swore they never heard her leave, but there was one detail that curdled my stomach when I read their statement. They said they woke briefly in the night to a scraping sound, like stones knocking together. When they looked, they saw 2 cairns stacked just outside the shelter door. In the morning, only 1 cairn remained. Her scarf was draped over it, folded neat. We never found her. That week taught me that even when you follow the rules, the mountains choose who to keep. It also taught me that sometimes the rules themselves are bait. They lure you into thinking survival is a game with fixed boundaries, when in truth the game changes whenever the ridges want it to. I began keeping stricter habits after that summer. I walked only with charms given by older rangers, odd trinkets of bone and iron, things that felt half superstitious, half desperate. I spoke less to hikers about folklore, more about discipline. Keep moving, stay sharp, never grow complacent. But still the woods watched. I began to notice the patterns in how they tested me. One evening, patrolling near Newfound Gap, I came across a brand new trail marker nailed to a tree. The paint was so fresh I could smell it. The letters carved deeper than standard issue. My first thought was that a volunteer maintenance crew had put it there. My second thought was that I should ignore it. And yet, the moment I stepped past, I felt something tug behind my eyes, like a hook in the brainstem, pulling me sideways. My feet wanted to turn. My legs wanted to obey. I stopped, breathing hard, sweat breaking despite the chill. I whispered the rules out loud, forcing the words through clenched teeth until the pull eased. Later, when I checked official records, no crew had worked that section of trail in months. There were other incidents, smaller but no less sharp. Once I bent to drink from a mountain spring and saw my reflection frowning when I was not. I jerked back so fast my head struck the rocks, splitting the skin above my ear. Another time, I found a lost boy wandering near a closed trail. He said he had been chasing after his mother's voice, though his mother was already at the ranger station in tears, begging us to find him. The boy's face looked pale, stretched almost hollow. When I handed him water, his reflection in the bottle showed no face at all. These things accumulate, they chip away. You stop doubting them, and you start doubting yourself instead. By my 5th year as a ranger, I had developed my own additions to the rules. I do not write them down, but I carry them like scars in my head. Do not answer radios after midnight, even if you hear your call sign. Do not trust maps that show paths where none exist on the ground. And most of all, never search alone for someone who ignored the rules. I know that sounds cruel, but the mountains bargain in lives. To save one, you risk another. The balance is never in our favor. The strangest night came during my 7th season. I was stationed near Fontana Lake, patrolling after reports of unusual lights in the forest. At midnight, I saw them lantern glows, swinging between the trees, spaced evenly like a procession. They moved without sound. No voices, no crunch of boots. Just pale circles floating through the dark. Against every instinct, I stepped closer. The air turned still, crushingly silent. I froze. And in that silence, I realized the lights were not drifting forward. They were waiting. A line of them hung in the trees like eyes. Then, one by one, they winked out until only the dark remained. When the wind returned, I turned and walked back without looking over my shoulder. I sometimes wonder why the rules hold at all. Why do they work, even for a while? Are they protections or are they permissions? Rituals the mountains allow us to believe in while they decide our fate. The old rangers never gave me an answer. Most retired early, taking their stories with them, eyes clouded by memories they never voiced. A few disappeared altogether. I keep their names in my notebook too. Even after all these years, the losses weigh heavier than the saves. For every hiker I guide back safely, there is another whose face I cannot forget, whose voice echoes in my ears when I lie awake. I remind myself that my job is not to defeat the mountains. No one can. My job is to walk the line between the living and whatever waits out there, to offer rules like lanterns in the dark. I do not expect gratitude. I only hope to delay the inevitable, for myself and for the strangers who wander into these ridges without knowing what they are walking into. That hope was tested last winter, during the longest night of my career. A search that began like any other, but ended with me questioning whether I had obeyed the rules or broken them without realizing it. It began with a single missing hiker, but it did not end that way. The mountains never let it end that way. The call came in on a bitter January evening, the kind of cold that stripped sound from the air and left the ridges sharp against the sky. A hiker was missing on a side trail near Mount LeConte. The man's wife had reported him overdue by 12 hours, and though most hikers who vanish in winter are found huddled or frozen not far from the path, I knew better than to take comfort in statistics. Missing was missing, and the mountains had their own ledger. I strapped on snowshoes, checked my pack twice, and met 2 other rangers at the trailhead. The moon was a pale smear behind clouds, offering little light. Our headlamps bobbed through the trees like frail stars. We called his name, though even as I did, I felt unease in my chest. I never trust names at night. The woods seemed to listen, to swallow the syllables whole. The radio crackled, then went dead. Standard issue batteries should last days, but all 3 units failed within the same minute. The silence that followed pressed in, thick as snow. The man's tracks were easy to follow, at first boot prints leading away from the trail, crunching into powder that had fallen only hours before. No hesitation, no circling. As if he had been drawn steadily onward. We followed for half a mile before the prints thinned. The snow deepened, yet the depressions grew shallower, until they barely grazed the surface. My skin prickled. I knew that pattern. I had seen it years before, when Connor walked barefoot into the creek. It is not a living weight that leaves such marks. The other rangers wanted to keep going. I shook my head. We wait, I told them. They frowned, not understanding. Then the wind cut off, sudden and absolute. Branches stilled. Snowflakes hung suspended, drifting without fall. The silence was total, unnatural. I lifted a hand and the others froze, finally grasping what I had felt. We stood in that breathless pause for what felt like an hour, but was surely only seconds. Then, as sharply as it had gone, the wind returned, carrying with it a faint sound, bells far off, like a church service carried from another valley. I knew there were no churches for 20 miles. We pressed on until the tracks stopped entirely. Not faded, stopped. The last print ended mid-stride, toes sunk in, heel lifted, as if the hiker had been plucked out of the world. We searched until our water bottles froze solid. We searched until dawn. Nothing. On the second night, one of the rangers, Stevens, woke me with a whisper. Someone's outside the tent. His voice trembled. I unzipped the flap and leaned out. Snow lay smooth all around, unbroken. Yet I saw a shadow moving just beyond the tree line. Not a person. Taller, stretched, as if the trunk itself had pulled loose and was walking upright. Its shape flickered with each sway of the headlamp, bending wrong. I closed the flap without a word. We did not sleep again that night. By the third day, the search was called off. Officially, the hiker was lost due to exposure. That phrase sits like poison in my stomach. It is tidy. It is false. I wrote his name in my notebook. I carry it still. What unsettled me most was what happened after. A week later, I returned alone to the same trail for routine patrol. The snow had melted to patches, and the forest carried that damp, thawing smell of rot. At the spot where the footprints had ended, I found something new, a cairn, no higher than my knee. Balanced stones, slick with ice. On the top stone lay a glove, fingers spread palm up. It matched the description his wife had given me. I did not touch it. I turned and walked away without a word. That winter blurred into spring, but the unease stayed with me. I began waking at night in the ranger station, certain I had heard footsteps pacing outside. When I checked, the snow would be smooth or the mud unbroken. But the sense of being observed never left. The mountains had tested me and found me wanting. I had obeyed the rules, but I had not saved the man. Perhaps that was the point. In May, hikers began reporting voices on the Aloneatnight Trail. Not human voices exactly, more like recordings played back wrong. A laugh stretched thin, a word repeated until it frayed. I walked the trail myself and heard it, a phrase whispered on the wind, indistinct but pulling. The hair rose on my arms. I pressed forward until the sound sharpened. It was my name. I did not answer. I turned back at once. But as I walked, the voice followed, circling from tree to tree, sometimes near, sometimes far, sometimes overhead, as though the ridges themselves had learned to speak. That summer, the mountains grew bold. A troop of scouts went missing for half a day, though they swore they had stayed on the trail. When we found them, they were standing in a hollow, each boy staring blankly at a different cairn. The cairns had formed a circle around them. We guided them out without touching the stones. Later, when I returned alone, the cairns were gone. The rules were tested again one stormy night in July. I was leading a search for a woman reported overdue by her husband. Rain lashed the canopy, turning the ground to mud. Lightning split the ridges in blinding veins. We called her name, though each time I did, I hated myself for breaking my own warning. Hours in, we found her rain jacket snagged on a branch. It was dry, bone dry, in the middle of a downpour. My stomach knotted. We kept moving until the storm died, until the wind cut off, and then we stopped. The silence was crushing. My fellow ranger shifted uneasily. "We can't just stand here," he whispered. I caught his sleeve, holding him still. Seconds dragged like hours. Then, faint but clear, we heard it, the woman's voice, pleading for help from deep in the trees. My partner's eyes filled with desperate relief. He tried to move. I held him fast. "Listen," I hissed. The voice was repeating now, identical each time. A recording lure? His face twisted as realization dawned. We waited until the wind returned, and with it came thunder rolling from a clear sky. We never found her. By the time autumn blood through the ridges, I was hollowed out. Every rule had been tested. Every night brought new whispers, new vanishings. I wondered if the mountains were no longer satisfied with hikers, if now they were circling closer to me. That suspicion hardened one October evening when I saw my own reflection in a pool beside the trail. I had stopped only to drink, kneeling to cup water in my hands. But the reflection that gazed back was smiling, though my mouth was grim. Its eyes glittered brighter than they should. And when I moved, the reflection stayed still for a beat too long. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The pool rippled, though no breeze stirred. I did not drink. I did not return to that hollow again. The truth is this: every ranger who stays long enough comes to a choice. Either you leave the job, carrying your nightmares with you into some safer valley, or you stay, and the mountains mark you as theirs. I fear I have already crossed that line. The rules keep me alive, yes, but sometimes I wonder if they are shaping me too, bending me into something that belongs here as much as the stone and shadow. The others in the service don't speak of it, but I see the same hollowness in their eyes. We are all bargaining in silence. We trade years of our lives for the hope that others might keep theirs. But I have begun to suspect the exchange is rigged. The mountains collect what they want, and the rest is theater. That is why I write this down. Not for comfort, not for confession, but because I know one day I will walk patrol and not return. My name will be added to the notebook I carry, written by another hand. And when that day comes, I want there to be no doubt I followed the rules. I obeyed them all. It did not matter. The first frost of November coated the ridges like glass when the mountains reminded me that rules are not shields. They are warnings, and warnings can fail. A group of 4 hikers had set out to climb a lesser-known spur trail near Klingman's Dome. They were experienced 2 couples in their 30s, the kind who read maps carefully and carried real gear. I had no reason to think they would be careless. When they checked in at the ranger station, I gave them the rules all the same. They nodded politely, but their eyes slid away. Most people cannot look you in the eye when you speak of voices and cairns. They mistake it for superstition, and in that mistake lies the seed of every tragedy. 2 days later, only one of the 4 stumbled out. Her name was Rachel. She was barefoot, lips blue, eyes wide and dry. When we carried her into the station, she clutched at my sleeve and whispered. They followed the wrong markers. They walked in circles. They wouldn't stop. We tried to warm her, tried to coax her into coherence, but all she did was repeat that phrase over and over until her voice cracked. They wouldn't stop. I led the search myself. Snow began to fall, thin at first, then heavy enough to cloak the trail. We found the first cairn half a mile in. It stood taller than me, stones balanced impossibly. My team froze, waiting for my command. I shook my head and motioned them to move around it. No one spoke. We found the second cairn in a hollow, this one ringed by footprints, 3 sets, circling like dancers around a fire that wasn't there. The prints crossed and recrossed until the snow was trampled flat, but none led away. One of my team muttered a prayer. Another swore. I hushed them both. Words are dangerous out here. The mountains collect them. I felt the air shift, not quite silent, but waiting. A stillness that lurked between gusts of wind. I called the search off then and there. Some rules are not meant to be bent. We carried Rachel out, though she never spoke a new sentence again. The other 3 became names in my notebook, their fates written in ink because the mountains had written them first. Rachel's case gnawed at me. She had survived, yet her eyes said she had been left behind in some other way. I visited her in the hospital weeks later. She sat by the window, pale against the thin light. When I entered, her gaze flicked to me sharp, almost feral. "You know what's out there," she whispered. It wasn't a question. Her voice cracked on the last word. "You let people go anyway." I had no answer. She turned her face to the window, and I knew she would never set foot in the mountains again. Survival can be its own prison. The following winter, I patrolled near Roan Mountain after reports of strange lights. I went alone against my better judgment. The night was clear, stars flaring cold overhead. Halfway up the ridge, I saw them. Lantern glows again, swinging in rhythm, drifting between the trees. I crouched, heart hammering. Then I realized the lights were not moving forward. They were circling, encircling me. My hand went to the radio, but static roared through it. The wind died. The forest held its breath. I remembered Rule 3 and froze where I stood, forcing my lungs to shallow breath. The lights tightened, brightening. I could make out shapes within them, outlines of figures carrying nothing, their faces blank voids where features should be. They marched soundlessly until they stood yards away, forming a ring. My pulse pounded so loud it felt obscene. Then, as one, the figures lifted their heads. The glow flared, searing white, my vision filled with afterimages. When it cleared, I was alone. The wind returned, carrying the cry of a barred owl. My legs shook as I walked back down the ridge. I did not write an incident report. Some truths curdle on the page. After that night, I began to feel watched even in daylight. Shadows seemed too long, too deliberate. I caught myself glancing into streams and ponds, terrified of what I might see reflected. The rules kept me alive, but they were carving at me. wearing me down like water against stone. Each time I recited them under my breath, I felt less like a ranger and more like a priest speaking ritual to an unseen congregation. Then came the child. It was early spring when a family reported their 8-year-old daughter missing from a campground. We mobilized instantly. Children vanish quickly in these mountains, and not always for natural reasons. We scoured the area, calling her name even as I knew it was dangerous. Hours passed. Then, just before dusk, I found her sitting calmly beside a stream, braiding wildflowers into her hair. Relief nearly buckled me. I knelt, speaking gently, asking if she was hurt. She shook her head, smiling. "Mama called me," she said. Her voice was dreamy, far away. She said to follow the river. So I did. I froze. Her mother was still back at camp, frantic weeping. I asked, "Where did you hear her?" The girl pointed downstream, into thick woods. "She was right there," she said. But then she went away. I coaxed her back, holding her hand tight. She hummed as we walked, a tune I almost recognized but could not place. When we reached camp, her mother sobbed with relief, clutching her close. The girl's eyes darted to the trees, expectant, like she was waiting for another voice. That night, I dreamed of water flowing uphill, carrying whispers with it. Weeks later, I was patrolling near that same stream when I found a new cairn. Smaller than most, but balanced with impossible precision. On top lay a child's wildflower crown, wilted brown. I walked away fast, not looking back. By summer, I had begun to sense a change. The mountains were not merely testing me, they were circling closer like wolves. One dusk patrol, I heard my own voice echoing back at me, speaking a word I had never said. My name stretched and warped, rising into laughter. I did not stop moving until I reached the station. When I entered, the other rangers looked up, startled. They swore they had just heard my voice outside, calling their names. That night, none of us slept. The rules have kept me alive, yes, but each season I feel them fray. Each season. I wonder if the mountains are not teaching me survival, but grooming me, shaping me into something they can use. I see it in the rookies, too. The longer they last, the hollower their eyes. Some leave early, trembling, a few stay, and the mountains mark them. I know because I see my own reflection in theirs. I once thought of myself as a guardian of hikers. Now I fear I am only a witness, a scribe for a ledger written in silence and stone. My notebook grows heavier with names. Some nights I think I hear the pages whisper. When I open it, the ink looks darker than it should, wet, as though freshly written. I have stopped writing at night. Still I patrol. Still I recite the rules. Not because I believe they will save me forever, but because they are all I have. They are the thin thread between me and the abyss that waits in these mountains. One day the thread will snap. Until then, I walk, I watch, I listen. And when the wind dies, I stand still and wait, heart hammering, until it returns. By the time autumn blood read through the valleys again, I had been a ranger long enough to recognize the patterns that whispered through the ridges, but not long enough to escape them. Each season left its teeth in me. I had come to believe the rules were not simply instructions for survival, but an unspoken agreement, a fragile contract between us and the mountains. You obey, and sometimes you are spared. You break them or even doubt them, and the mountains collect. But that autumn proved the rules were not enough anymore. It started with a string of disappearances that did not match the old patterns. A father and son went missing near Shuckstack Tower, but when we searched, we found their packs still on the trail, food untouched, radios still on. Their boots, however, were neatly side by side, as though they had both decided to step out of them at once. The tracks around the boots didn't lead away, they just ended. I remember staring at those boots until the cold gnawed at my skin. One of the younger rangers whispered that maybe they had walked on barefoot. I told him sharply to shut his mouth. Words like that give the forest permission. 2 weeks later, an entire group of hikers vanished from Spence Field. 5 people, all seasoned, had set out for a loop. They never came back. When we swept their campsite, we found the tents zipped from the inside, but empty, sleeping bags still laid out. The fire had been reduced to cold ash, but the strange part was the cairns, 3 of them, built in a perfect line right at the edge of camp. None of us touched them. We backed out quietly, and I knew the case was closed before it even began. They would never be found. But the worst came in November, on a night when the fog rolled so thick that the trails seemed to sink into nothing. A couple reported their teenage daughter missing from the Appalachian Trail near Charlie's Bunyan. I knew the family. They had checked in at the station, the girl rolling her eyes as her parents fussed with her coat. "She'll be fine," I had told them. How arrogant those words sound to me now. We formed a search team immediately. The fog muffled every sound, so even our voices seemed swallowed. Radios cut in and out. My light beam reached only a few feet before it dissolved into gray. Then we heard it, a child's laughter, high and thin. We followed, hearts thundering, certain we were close. But the laughter kept ahead of us, never nearer, never farther, always just out of reach. At one point I swore I heard my own voice threaded into it, calling her name. When the wind stopped, we froze. The silence hit like a weight. One of the rangers muttered, "We can't just stand here." I grabbed his arm and hissed, "Don't move." Seconds dragged. The fog thickened. And then the laughter cut off. What replaced it was a whisper close, brushing my ear, my own name, Nathaniel. The air shifted cold, and just like that, the wind returned. We never found the girl. The family screams echoed down the ridge as we carried the news back. I added another name to my notebook. That night, I dreamed of cairns stacked beside my bed, each stone balanced on the next, and when I reached to knock them over, I woke to find my hand raised in the dark. After that, the forest grew bolder with me. I began to see figures at the edge of my vision, always just beyond the beam of the flashlight. Shapes that looked like rangers I knew, only taller or thinner, or with faces I couldn't quite make out. One night, while patrolling near Cades Cove, I heard a voice on my radio. My call sign, clear as day, repeated 3 times. I lifted the receiver, instinct ready to answer. Then I stopped. The voice was mine. Every inflection, every pause, my own voice calling myself. I shut the radio off and walked the rest of the patrol in silence. By December, I felt hunted. Not just tested, hunted. I knew it in my bones. The mountains had stopped toying with hikers. They were circling me directly, peeling away whatever protections the rules gave. I found new cairns each week, always in places only I patrolled. My reflection in water pools would smile when I did not. Once I saw words scratched into the bark of a sycamore siargabu, spelled in long gouges. My last name. The bark was still curling raw and wet, as if it had been carved minutes earlier. I had passed that very tree the day before, and it had been unmarked. The worst moment came just before Christmas. I was alone in the station, writing reports, when I heard boots crunching outside. Relieved at the sound of another human being, I opened the door. Snow drifted down, coating the path, but no one was there. Only a line of prints leading to the threshold. My own boot prints, heel to toe. Perfect matches. I had not been outside all day. The prints ended at the doorway. My chest tightened as if a hand had gripped my ribs. I closed the door and locked it. Though I knew locks meant nothing here, I did not sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the radio, notebook in my lap, reciting the rules over and over until dawn. It felt less like protection than confession. By morning, the prints had vanished. I began to dread patrols, though I still went. Duty bound me, or maybe pride, maybe something darker. Perhaps the mountains wanted me to keep walking into their jaws, and I was already too bound to refuse. Each time I returned alive, I wondered if survival was a gift or a delay. One evening, while crossing a ridge near the North Carolina border, I heard a chorus of voices rising with the wind. Not words at first, just tones layered, rising and falling like chant. Then my name threaded through, spoken in dozens of different inflections, old and young, male and female. My throat closed. I whispered the rule, "Do not answer," and kept walking, but the voices followed. When I finally looked back, I saw shadows moving against the last light of dusk. They walked in step, a procession of figures with no faces. I turned away, heart hammering, and marched until my legs failed. That night, back in the cabin, I stared into the mirror above the sink. For a long moment, I thought the reflection wasn't mine. The uniform was the same, the tired eyes the same, but the mouth was wrong. It smiled when I did not. I smashed the mirror with my fist and left the shards scattered across the floor. To this day, I cannot stand to see myself reflected. The rules had always been my lifeline, but that winter I began to wonder if they had become a leash. Obedience kept me alive, yes, but alive for what? To watch the mountains take others. To be slowly hollowed until I was more theirs than my own. Every ranger faces this question eventually. Some retire early haunted, others vanish without warning. Their names written in someone else's notebook. I know my time is drawing close. The mountains are patient. They circle, they whisper, they wait. I still walk the trails. I still recite the rules. But each time I hear the wind cut off, each time I see a cairn balanced in impossible silence, I wonder if I am not following the rules at all, but being shaped by them, bent into something the mountains want me to become. And if that is true, then perhaps the final rule is one I have never dared to speak aloud. There comes a point when survival is not winning. It is surrender. Winter thawed reluctantly that year, dragging mud and mist through every hollow. The mountains seemed restless, as though the weight of snow had only sharpened what lay beneath. I felt it in my bones. Each patrol, each step, carried the sense of something waiting for me, as if the ridges had grown tired of whispering from the tree line and now wanted to stand face to face. The first sign came in March. I was alone on an early patrol, the air thick with fog that muffled every sound. Near a bend in the trail, I noticed boot prints, large, fresh, sinking deep in the soft ground. At first I thought another ranger had come through, though no one had signed out that morning. I crouched to study them. My blood went cold. They were my own prints. Every tread, every scuff, identical to my boots. But I had not yet walked this section. I straightened and followed the line forward until the trail looped back on itself, and I found the prints leading straight toward me. They ended where I stood. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. I did not wait to see what would fill it. The second sign came in April, when I checked the registry at the trailhead and found my own name written there in neat block letters. Nathaniel Crow. Time stamped at dawn. I had not been to the trailhead that morning, nor signed anything. I tore the page free, but when I returned the next day, my name was there again, written twice. The ink looked fresh. I locked the binder away after that, though it did nothing to stop the unease clawing through me. The third sign came in May, and it nearly broke me. A new ranger named Holloway had joined for the season, fresh-faced, eager, not yet carved by the ridges. He patrolled with me often, asking questions, scribbling notes about flora, safety, and search procedure. One evening, we camped near a hollow where the wind cut strangely. As we ate by the fire, Holloway glanced at me with a nervous smile. "You know, I've been hearing your name a lot at night. Just outside the tent. I thought you were checking on me." I nearly dropped my tin cup. My skin turned to ice. "What did you hear?" I asked. "Just your voice," he said casually. "Sometimes it calls from the trees, sometimes from the ridge. It always sounds like you." I did not sleep that night. Every rustle of leaves, every sigh of wind felt like my own ghost pacing the perimeter. Holloway lasted only another week before he left. He said the mountains unnerved him, that the nights felt wrong. I did not argue. I envied his escape. By June, I knew the mountains had turned their full attention on me. They no longer tested me with voices or cairns meant for others. The rules still worked, but they worked less cleanly, like locks whose tumblers grind with rust. I feared they were not protections at all, but rehearsals, practice drills for the real encounter that was now inevitable. One evening, I received a report of lights near Andrews Bald. I hiked out, dusk pressing hard on the trees, the air thick with summer insects. At the clearing I saw them immediately, a line of lantern glows, swinging, marching slow across the field. My stomach clenched. They had appeared before, but always at a distance, always vanishing before I could approach. This time they drew closer. Figures moved inside the glow, tall and thin, heads bowed, steps in perfect unison. I recited Rule 3 under my breath, bracing for the silence, but the wind did not stop. The procession advanced without pause, circling until I stood in the center. My light beam cut through, but their faces were wrong, blurred, shifting like wet clay, molding and remolding. Then, one face stilled. My own. It looked at me, and in its gaze I felt a pull stronger than gravity, an invitation to step forward to join. My knees weakened. For a heartbeat I swayed. Then I remembered Rule 1. Do not answer when called. And I realized the calling did not have to be words. It could be a reflection, a smile, a face. I closed my eyes and stood still, fists clenched, repeating the rules until the air shifted. When I opened them, the field was empty. But in the grass where they had stood, I found my notebook, though I had left it locked in the station. I picked it up with shaking hands. A new name had been written inside, in ink I did not own: Nathaniel Crow. I burned the notebook that night, but the name lingers in my memory like smoke. July brought storms, and with them, new vanishings. A pair of hikers disappeared near Deep Creek, their camp found soaked but intact, fire still smoldering as if abandoned minutes before. Another man vanished near Abrams Falls. We found his phone on the trail, screen glowing, camera open. The last image was a photo of me, not posed, not from a distance, a close shot taken at night. Of me standing in the woods, eyes reflecting light. I do not know when it was taken. I do not know who held the camera. I smashed the phone against a rock until it shattered. Each case pushed me further into the edge of belief and madness. I began to speak less with other rangers, afraid my voice might carry wrong, might echo where it shouldn't. I avoided mirrors, avoided water, avoided even the gleam of glass. My reflection felt too eager. My shadow seemed too patient. The mountains had begun to erase the boundary between what was outside and what was inside. The rules still hummed through me, but they no longer felt like my own. They felt spoken into me, like vows whispered by something older. I obeyed them because disobedience would end me, but I wondered if obedience was only slower poison. One night in August, I dreamed of the ridges stretching endless, cairns stacked along every crest, each crowned with bones. My notebook lay open on a cairn in the dream, pages turning themselves, every name inked in my handwriting. When I woke, my hand was cramped around an invisible pen. The skin of my palm bore black smudges, though I had not touched ink in days. I walked the trails that morning with a strange calm. Fear had burned out of me. What replaced it was a grim clarity. The mountains were not asking me to survive. They were asking me to surrender, and sooner or later I would. Still, I patrol. Still, I recite the rules. They keep me tethered, even as the tether frays. The mountains whisper my name, show me my face, call me deeper. I resist, though resistance feels more fragile each season. My survival is no longer defiance. It is delay, and delay, I know now, is only another word for mercy. The end began quietly, as endings often do. No storm announced it, no scream cut through the ridges. It was an ordinary September patrol, the kind I had done 1,000 times before. The air was sharp with the first bite of autumn, the leaves just starting to turn. I set out before dawn, packed tight on my shoulders, rifle slung, notebook tucked deep where I could not feel it press. I told myself it was just another walk through the spine of mountains that had become my home and my cage. But even before the sun lifted, I knew the ridges were waiting. The silence was not unnatural yet. It was the kind of hush you notice only after years of listening, but it pressed, insistent. Every step echoed too long, as though the trail stretched beneath me farther than it should. When I paused for water, I did not look into the stream. I did not need to. I could feel eyes there, watching from the surface. I had memorized the rules, lived them, bled them. They had shaped me as surely as any uniform or badge. Do not answer your name after dark. Do not trust fresh markers. Do not move when the wind dies. Do not touch cairns. Do not linger in reflections. They had kept me alive longer than most, but lately I had come to wonder if they were never meant for my survival at all. Perhaps they were meant to keep me walking long enough, docile enough, until the mountains were ready. Around noon, I reached a hollow I did not recognize. That is not unusual here. The ridges shift. The woods bend trails into loops. Still, unease rose in me as I studied the place. Cairns stood in a circle, small but deliberate, each crowned with scraps of fabric, red, green, colors that had once belonged to shirts or jackets, now faded to tatters. In the center of the circle lay my notebook. I froze. I had left it back in the station. I knew I had. Yet there it was, waiting for me. My first instinct was to turn and run, but I did not. Instead, I stepped closer, slow, deliberate, as if compelled. The cairns loomed taller as I neared, though I knew the stones had not moved. I crouched and touched the notebook. Cold shot through my fingers, colder than ice, colder than stone. The pages fluttered open on their own. I saw names written in my hand, dozens, maybe hundreds. Hikers, rangers, strangers. And then, one after another, every name repeated, Nathaniel Crow. My name again and again, filling page after page until the ink ran like blood. I slammed the book shut. My breath came ragged. The wind died. The silence pressed like a hand against my mouth. I stood locked in place, every muscle straining not to move. Then I heard it. Not one voice, not one call, but a chorus. My name spoken from every direction in every tone. Old, young, female whispered, shouted my name, folding over itself until it became meaningless. The cairns trembled, stones shifted but did not fall. I clenched my fists and closed my eyes. Do not answer. Do not move. The words were no longer rules. They were pleas. My body shook. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt, pulling me toward the circle. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood, forcing myself to stay rooted. When the wind returned, it was not gentle. It roared through the hollow, tearing leaves from trees, flinging grit into my face. I opened my eyes and the cairns were gone. Only bare earth remained, and the notebook lay at my feet. I snatched it up without looking inside and stumbled out of the hollow, heart hammering like a war drum. But the mountains were not done. Dusk glowed fast, shadows stretching long and strange. The trail bent in ways I did not recognize. Trees leaned inward, their branches knitting into an arch that swallowed the last of the light. My headlamp sputtered, battery fresh that morning, but its beam reached only a few feet before choking on the dark. Shapes moved beyond the edge of the glow. Figures tall and thin walking in step. Their faces blurred, shifting. Each time the beam caught one, it bent into mine. My own face, dozens of times, smiling wrong. I turned away, muttering the rules, stumbling forward. My boots sank deeper than the earth should allow, each step dragging like mud though the ground was dry. Voices threaded through the trees, not calling my name now, but reciting the rules themselves. My rules, spoken in my cadence, my voice. The woods mocked me with my own scripture. I reached a clearing at last. Stars burned overhead, sharp and wrong, constellations I did not know. In the center stood a cairn taller than any I had ever seen, nearly twice my height, stones balanced in impossible defiance. On its crown lay a mirror, cracked down the mirror. I saw myself in it, though I did not want to. My reflection stared back, smiling. Its mouth moved, though mine did not. You followed well, it whispered. My throat locked. My hands smashed the mirror to topple the cairn, but I knew better. The rules were not guidance, they were chains, and now they had led me here. The reflection's smile widened. Stay. I dropped the notebook. I ran. Branches whipped my face, stones tore at my boots, but I did not stop until I burst onto a trail I knew. The familiar blaze marker gleamed, weathered and cracked, blessedly real. I stumbled down until the ranger station's lights pierced the dark. Only then did I collapse, gasping. I have not written an official report. How could I? What words could explain what the mountains showed me? The notebook I dropped in that clearing never returned with me, though sometimes I feel its weight in my pack. I do not check. I will not check. Now, I sit here, night after night, waiting for the next patrol, the next test. The rules hum in my blood, but I no longer trust them. They are not salvation. They are summons. Each one followed brings me closer, step by step, to whatever waits in the heart of these ridges. I know my name is already written. Not just in my notebook, not just in bark and stone. Written into the mountain itself, carved deep where no map can show. The chorus will call again, and sooner or later, I will answer. Not because I break the rule, because I become the rule. If you hike these trails, remember what I told you. Follow the rules, yes. But understand this, they will not save you. At best, they will buy you time. And when the mountains decide that time is over, no rule, no ranger, no prayer will keep you. I am Nathaniel Crow. I have kept hikers alive for 15 years. I have followed every rule, and still, the Appalachian mountains are calling me home.